it's just Martine, and welcome to another Recent Reads. In this Recent Reads, I'm going to be sharing 5 books that I've read pretty recently. It's actually kind of been a while since I read these books, I feel like. But I'm going to tell you a little about them, tell you some ratings, tell you some thoughts. Maybe you'll be interested in some of these, maybe you'll have read some of them before. Let's get to it, starting from lowest all the way to highest. The lowest of this round of Recent Reads is Cave in the Rock by Sebastian, which is the second book in this series that I started from NetGalley a little while ago, and I might have discussed it. It was in one of my last 2 Recent Reads, but because it's a NetGalley review, I wrote quite an extensive review about it. So if you want more information, you can check my Goodreads. But I did give this 3 stars. I enjoyed it a little better than the first one. It gave me some of the things that I was asking for by the end of the first one, so that's always good. Next, I just have a bunch of 4 stars for you. So I have Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora and Hurston, which I believe is like a modern classic-ish type thing. But yeah, I gave it 4 stars. And it's about this woman named Janie who's living in the 30s and is desperately trying to find true love in her life. And so we end up being told about a series of events in her life where she takes chances and she meets new people and she pursues love and joy and grief and all of those things. I appreciated that it was set in Florida. I did not know about that going in. It was specifically set in Eatonville for a lot of the time, which was one of the first self-governing Black communities in Florida, which was like given page time in the book, which was very interesting. And they also mentioned in the book lots of other places in Florida that I know about or things that I know about. So experiences with hurricanes. There's a hurricane in this book. Know that experience too well. The Seminole tribe have experience with that. So it was just interesting to have that sprinkled in because I definitely wasn't expecting it. I thought the audiobook narrator did a terrific job. I listened to it on an audiobook and I think that was a good choice. Like, I think it added a lot to what the story itself was particularly trying to convey. And in the end, it's just a book about life and I tend to enjoy those types of books. There's no crazy plot required. It's just about strong characters. And it's interesting to note that this book was originally rejected because of its portrayal of a strong Black female protagonist, and I loved her. Janie was a great lead character to be following. She had lots of interesting things to talk about, discussions to have, interesting life experiences and perspectives on love and life and grief, and I just appreciated how it was all put together. So I did enjoy that one. Next, we have another modern classic, I believe, which is The Perks of Being a Wallflower by Chbosky. You've likely heard of this book, but just in case you don't know anything about it, it's a modern classic coming-of-age story with discussions of mental health representation, and specifically it has a male POV for the main character, and in particular with the topics that this book tries to cover, whether it's like mental health, trauma, all of those things, covering a male's perspective of them is really important and interesting and kind of groundbreaking in some ways, because often we have female characters who cover those topics, so having a young male character represent that was really huge. Overall, I thought it was okay. There were some good quotes. I was definitely enjoying the conversations about books that were had in there. Just saying, it would be really interesting to read all these books in there. I'm sure somebody has done that, whether they documented it or not. I'm just saying it would be an interesting process to read all of them and then maybe like revisit this book afterwards and see how those books specifically changed Charlie as a character. I think my favorite part in this, and this is going to sound weird, but my favorite part was definitely the afterword. The ebook that I had was celebrating the like 20th year of this book, and so there was an afterword by Chbosky, but it was written from Charlie's perspective too. So it was written like a letter from Charlie, like all the rest of the book is, and it was addressing all the people who have written to him since the book released 20 years ago, and the things that he learned from the letters from them and what he's gotten from that experience, which I thought was really beautiful, because there's a lot of times in The Perks of Being a Wallflower where I think things are not said explicitly that necessarily show all the mental health representation or exactly how Charlie is feeling. Like, he's trying to express himself, but sometimes he doesn't quite land. And it was a lot more direct in the afterword, and to see the impact that it's had on other people is incredible. I didn't read this at a particular moment in my life where it would make like a huge impact, but there are lots of people who have had that experience with this book, and it was really nice seeing that reflected in the new version, and I really loved that it was from Charlie. I thought that was really special. Next up, we have another 4-star, which is actually the final book in the like challenge that my friends and I set usually every year, where we exchange our list of favorite books from either the past or the year before, and we each pick a book from each person's list and we read those. So this is my last one. I read The Long Way Too Small, Angry Planet by Becky Chambers, which is Melody's pick from Strawberry Lemon. I gave this 4 stars. I really enjoyed it, and I think that this has potential to get like 5 stars as the series continues. The main thing about this book, and I didn't particularly know this going in, the characters are fantastic, great, definitely the highlight. This is not a book that's meant to be about the plot, it's meant to be about the characters, and I did really enjoy that. That did mean though that sometimes when action happened, I'd be like, why is this happening? Because it was like not part of the story, and suddenly it was, and things were happening, and I was like, why is that thing happening? And that could have been because I spaced out, spaced out for a second, or not. When I read a synopsis later just to double check what I thought I knew about the story, I was like, I'm not sure that I missed anything really important that would make this make a whole ton of sense. So I was like listening, enjoying the characters, then I zoned out really hard for a second and suddenly everything was happening and I was like, oh no. This book, in case you don't know, is basically about the crew of a spaceship. Heavy emphasis on the crew of the spaceship, not so much like what they're doing, but in general, their crew goes around making wormholes as a form of transit. The book joins the crew right at the moment where the main character, Rosemary, does. She joins the crew as like a clerk. It's an interspecies crew, so there are lots of different species on board, and specifically, since we're largely seeing it from Rosemary's perspective, and she has had training in interspecies, like communication and work and stuff, it's really interesting to see her perspective on that. There's also some LGBTQIA plus representation in here. Every species felt so like real and complete and understood in this, and they all had traits that I really loved about them. Like I was rooting for each of the characters the whole time. Their connections I was rooting for. That was great, and I'm definitely excited to continue this series. Finally, I have my 1 5-star read for this, and that's Under the Banner of Heaven by Jon Krakauer. And I specifically read this because it's being adapted. It's going to be on Hulu. It should be sometime this spring. I can't nail down whether it's going to be a movie or a limited series, but either way, it stars Andrew Garfield. So of course I was like, I need to prepare for this mentally. So I read this book, and this book is nonfiction. It's largely about Mormonism in general and the Church of Latter-day Saints. It's specifically about like the off groups from that, the more extreme versions of the religion, the ones who still practice polygamy and stuff. And it's also like centered around the idea of this crime that happened where this mom and her baby were killed because this person said that he heard God tell him that he needed to kill them. It's got a lot of interesting conversations. First, you've got this conversation about religion, and I really didn't know much about Mormonism going into this, so I found it very educational, useful, interesting, and it was nice. I think Jon Krakauer did a really good job of differentiating, like, these are the beliefs of like the general Mormon population. This is a different sect, this is a different sect, this is a different sect. Here's how each sect like grew from this one idea of Mormonism. So there's lots of history, but there's also like theological perspectives talking about what happened like in those communities that may have caused divides and the different people that were responsible for that, which was fascinating. Then you have the element of true crime, which the crime really didn't like sit at the forefront of the story. Like it's in the opening of the story, and it's a reason why he focuses on this specifically, but it's not like really central to it, although it provides the groundwork for Jon Krakauer to ask the question about religion and religious beliefs and also rights in America. So I think my favorite part of this was the section where they were talking about the trials and how some people were going for insanity defense, some people refused to do insanity defense for this murder. There was this great conversation about religious beliefs and insanity, and so they were specifically tackling the push and pull that was happening among the group of forensic psychologists who were trying to make the determinations in these cases. And they made the great point. There are so many mental illnesses that are associated with delusions, magical thinking, breaks from reality, etc. But then a lot of things in religion in general, across almost every religion, is based on that more mystical thinking, just general beliefs of things that you can't always see. And the belief in things that you can't always see is like the cornerstone of religion. And where do you draw that line between common religious views, or just religious views in general, no matter how uncommon, and mental illness? Where do they intersect? Where are they completely different? And how specifically can you put people on trial and defend them or try to protect them when you have that distinction? And it's hard to do. You can't just say, it's okay that this person did it, like it's not okay, but they're going to be treated this way instead of that way because they're mentally ill, when it it's not outside the scope of normal religious beliefs and the way that humanity looks at religion. I'm doing a terrible job of covering this. If you're at all interested in this discussion, you just need to read the book. But I really enjoyed the section that specifically discussed, I think it was 5 forensic psychologists. They were like evenly split on their belief about mental illness and religion and those things in the trial, so the insanity defense in particular. And as a forensic psychology student, that was not something that I thought about before, and it was very eye-opening and incredibly interesting to me. I don't know how they're going to turn this into a movie or a limited series, but I'm ready. Like, they've taken this piece of nonfiction, they're going to fictionalize it in some way. I think Andrew Garfield is playing a Latter-day Saint detective, which I think will be interesting, how that will play into this. I'm excited for the discussions on religion and that. John Krakauer mentioned in like the latter part of this book that he just wanted to talk about religion in general, but he was like, that's too big of a book to write, so he focused on Mormonism because he grew up, I think, in Utah, and so he was around Mormon communities a lot growing up. This is my favorite John Krakauer book to date. I've read one other of his, and it was Into the Wild. Obviously, it's also been adapted to a movie. I like this one a lot better, probably just because I enjoyed the discussions in this one more. In general, his writing is pretty great. He does a good job weaving things together and making things interesting, even though they're nonfiction. So I definitely recommend him. But if you're looking for discussions on religion, then I'd point you to this one of his books instead of Into the Wild. Or if you're looking at like the criminal justice system in America, then I'd point you to this book instead of Into the Wild. If you care about people living outside of society or alone, then maybe read Into the Wild. Also, if you've seen the movie but you haven't read Into the Wild, like, I'd be wary going into it because that was the situation with me, and I hadn't known originally that it was nonfiction, so it was a very weird wake-up call. I loved this book. Under the Banner of Heaven was just stupendous. Yeah, that's my review. So those are the 5 books. If you like this video, go ahead and give it a big thumbs up and comment down below. Have you read any of these books? If not, which one is most interesting to you? Or even if you have. If there are others that you haven't read, tell me what you're interested in from this review. And subscribe for more reading, writing, and college lifestyle content. And until next time, bye humans, bye!